What's going on, guys? My name is Matt and I am back with a new budget build. This time the price point is $200 and I'm very happy with what I was able to put together for this price. Normally at this price point I would buy and upgrade a pre-built, but with the system I wanted to go fully custom and that's exactly what I did. Now just a quick disclaimer, this PC is using used parts. It's very difficult to put together a new PC for $200, let alone anything that can play modern games. And going used meant I was able to build a really well balanced system with nice features like an SSD and a powerful dedicated graphics card. Now this video isn't meant to be an exact guide on how to put together this PC. It's more meant to show you that if you do your research, hunt for deals, and be persistent, then you can put together a powerful gaming rig for a very low price. Now because I did deal hunt, it meant I bought these parts spread out over a few weeks to make sure I was getting a good deal on each part. Because the budget was set so low, it meant anything modern like Ryzen or newer Intel CPUs were out of the question. What I decided to do was go for the very popular budget option of the Intel Xeon X3440. This is essentially a first gen i7 without the hyper-threading. It has 4 cores, 8 threads, and is able to be overclocked a pretty substantial amount, which is definitely something you want to do if you're going to be picking one up. But really, the best thing is that this X3440 is $15 or less on sites like eBay and AliExpress, making this an absolute incredible value for the money, which you'll see during the benchmarks. One of the biggest problems with older CPUs is that the motherboards that they're compatible with can get pretty pricey relative to the price of the CPU itself. This is because motherboards are generally more fragile, so as time goes on, the supply of old CPUs stays consistent, but the supply of motherboards slowly drops. This meant I had to do my best to hunt for a really good motherboard deal. Ideally, you'd get a P55 board to go with the X3440 because that chipset is meant to produce good overclocks. But on a tight budget like mine, going with an H55 board can yield a mild overclock at a much lower motherboard price. After hunting for deals, I ended up winning an auction for this Gigabyte GA H55M S2H. This is a pretty basic micro ATX H55 board, but for my needs it worked great. Now, because this is an older board, you are giving up some nice features like USB 3 and SATA 6 gigabit per second ports, but some of these issues can be remedied with PCI or PCIe expansion cards later down the line. One other pitfall of buying a used motherboard is that many times they don't come with I/O shields, which this one was no exception. I personally don't mind it, but I could understand why this might be a deal breaker for some of you out there. For $31, this motherboard's cheap and gets the job done. Moving on to the CPU cooler, this is an area where I didn't want to get the absolute cheapest option available just because I was going to be overclocking the CPU. With that being said, spending more on the CPU cooler than the CPU itself seemed like it wouldn't make much sense. Being someone who frequents r/build-a-PC sales, when I saw there was a $3 off any purchase on eBay coupon, I knew I should use it to buy a cheap CPU cooler, and that's exactly what I did. Say hello to the SoPlay 290L, which is basically the cheapest tower style CPU cooler I could find on eBay, which while compared to many tower style coolers on the market, this isn't great, but it's still a big step up from many of these super basic aluminum only coolers you find around this price. This was $12 with free shipping, but using the $3 off code, it brought the price down to only $9. This tower style cooler has 2 copper heat pipes and a decently sized aluminum fin array, which cools the CPU with the help of this 92mm fan. Well, the box says it's compatible with every chipset under the sun. In reality, it's only compatible with LGA 1150X CPUs. The mounting system is super simple with a backplate and 4 pre-attached tension screws. It has pre-applied thermal paste and installation takes all of 3 minutes. The combination of this cooler and the H55 motherboard allowed me to get this X3440 up to a modest 3.5 GHz across all cores, which while not as far as you could push it with a P55 board, is still a pretty decent improvement over stock performance. This cooler performs decently well, definitely not as well as something like a Cryorig M9i, but for $9 this guy provides adequate cooling and acceptable temps. Moving on to RAM, I just got 2 4GB basic sticks of this crucial 1333 MHz DDR3 for $25. This is a little more than I usually like to spend for 8GB of DDR3, but it fit the budget, and in most cases 8GB is plenty for gaming. If this board had 2 extra slots, I probably would have populated them with two 2GB sticks for a total of 12GB, but I was limited to 2 sticks and 16GB was too far out of the budget for this system. 8GB again is good for gaming, but I would have loved to have a little extra for more demanding games or for other programs like Discord or Skype that might be running in the background while you game. For storage, I actually had enough room in the budget to splurge on an SSD. Usually for this tight of a budget, going with a 500GB 7200 RPM white label mechanical hard drive for $20 is the way to go. This gives you a good amount of storage at an affordable price that will work perfectly fine. But for this build, I opted to spend $30 on a new 240GB SSD. This is an OCZ TR200. This guy's a budget-oriented SSD, and even though it will be running on a SATA 2 interface, it's still a huge improvement over a mechanical hard drive and should be enough storage for someone getting into PC gaming. And if you run out of space, you can easily add on a mechanical hard drive later down the line for mass storage. I personally recommend pretty much everyone start out with an SSD. As for me personally, I find it can have such a big impact on usability of the machine, with faster boot up times, file transfers, program loading times, and really improves the overall snappiness of the system. Next up is the graphics card, which takes the system from basic computer to gaming beast. I watched listings for a while on eBay and was hoping to snag something like an RX 470, but nothing came up in my budget, so I ended up settling for an AMD R9 280, which is still a respectable graphics card and is a really great budget option, as it has 3GB of GDDR5 video memory versus the 2GB you normally see on cards in this price range. I got this card for just under $50 total. I think it was $37 for the card and $11 for shipping. This particular card is the MSI Gaming 3G version, which has a really nice cooler with multiple copper heat pipes, a good size fin array, and 2 fans. I think the design of this cooler is really nice. It doesn't have a backplate or anything, but still, I think it looks really clean. For $48, this provides really good performance for the money, being able to play most any game you throw at it. With all this being said, it is a pretty power-hungry card requiring 8-pin and 6-pin supplemental PCIe power. This meant I had to get a power supply that was going to be able to provide plenty of clean power to the entire system. The power supply is probably the most predictable component in this system. What I went with is this EVGA 600 watt 80 plus white certified power supply that I got for $15 on an EVGA midweek madness sale. If you don't know, EVGA has a sale every Wednesday to clear out their refurbished inventory, and a couple times a month these units go on sale for $15 or $20. I picked up a bunch of these at $15 and have used them in a ton of builds and have never had a problem. This power supply is non-modular and has ketchup and mustard cables, but for $15 you really can't find anything that beats this in terms of value for the money, even going on a site like eBay. These parts are great, but they all need a place to live, and that's where this PC case comes in. This is the Rosewell FBM X1, a very basic micro ATX case that I got on sale for only $20. A couple times a month, Newegg has cases for only $19.99 with free shipping, and this past month, this was one of those cases. For $20, this is an absolute steal. It has a side panel window, 2 included fans, and an actually decent amount of room for cable management. I personally think the looks are okay, they're not anything to get excited about, but I have definitely seen worse. My only big gripe with a case like this one is the support bar towards the front. This makes the case difficult to work in, and the way it was in its stock form wouldn't have allowed for this GPU to be used in the system. The graphics card itself would have fit, but the PCI connectors made it just too tall to fit. But this is nothing a jigsaw and some tin snips can't fix. I cut out a slot for the GPU to fit into, then used a file to eliminate the sharp edges. I then just used a little electrical tape to cover the rough edges. This mod allowed the GPU to fit fine and allowed this whole PC to come together quite nicely. The build went relatively smooth and I was able to get the cable management pretty neat, but it's honestly hard for me to recommend this case for beginners because it is a little difficult to work in. If the support brace wasn't there, it would be an easy recommendation, but honestly for $20 I am being a little nitpicky. After finishing the build and taking a step back, I was pretty happy with the build and realized I had another $8 to spend. One trip to eBay later and I got a Windows 10 key so that I wouldn't need that ugly Activate Windows overlay in the bottom right of my screen. Once Windows was installed, all that was left to do was to install some games and get to benchmarking. I decided to test 4 games that range in difficulty. These games include Apex Legends, Far Cry 5, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and Overwatch. Starting things off with Far Cry 5, which is a modern and relatively hard to run game. I used the built-in benchmark and tested at 1080p normal settings, which is basically medium-low. This test resulted in an average of 54 FPS with 1% lows of 39. This is pretty respectable performance from a system at this price point, and a 60 FPS average could probably be achieved at low settings. Next up is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, another modern and difficult to run game. At 1080p low settings with the built-in benchmark, I found the system produced a 66 FPS average with 1% lows of 37. Averaging above 60 FPS in this modern of a title is great, but the 1% lows did leave a little bit to be desired. Moving on to Apex Legends, one of the more popular battle royale titles out right now. Using a mix of medium and high settings, I found the system produced an average of 65 FPS with 1% lows of 47. This was a perfectly playable experience, and there's a good amount of room to turn settings down to increase FPS for a more fluid experience. Finally, the last game tested was Overwatch. This represents an easier to run esports title, and usually if a system can't run Overwatch, then I don't really consider it a gaming PC. At 1080p high settings, the system produced a very enjoyable experience at 85 FPS average, and with 1% lows of 76. So it was fun to hop into some matches of a game I used to play all the time. As you can see, 60 FPS gaming at low settings in modern titles is surprisingly possible with this system, and for stuff like Apex Legends, PUBG, and Fortnite, a system like this is more than adequate for competitive play. The fact I was able to get this performance out of a fully custom system at $200 and didn't have to go the upgraded pre-built route makes me really happy. Again, this did take some deal hunting, but any of you could do this with enough patience, research, and persistence. I'll have names and links to all of the parts and websites mentioned in the video in the description down below. I'll also link a playlist with some other PC builds I've done, so if you want to check that out, you can. Overall, this project was a complete success, and for $200, I'm very proud of the system's performance. So yeah guys, I think this wraps this video up. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing for more PC and tech related content in the future. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.